The floor of my porch had never seemed so cold and distant as it did on that Tuesday morning in San Antonio. I remember the Texas spring sun weakly warming my stooped shoulders, the smell of jasmine coming from the neighbor's yard, and the sound of children laughing in the distance, a melody from a life that no longer seemed to be mine. And then, the dull thud of my knees against the aged wood, the muffled cry that was lost in my throat as the world spun and darkened. The last thing I saw before consciousness abandoned me were the frightened faces of a young couple, framed in the doorway of the house my late husband, Roberto, built with his own hands. They were holding a piece of paper, a contract, and the words that came from the young man's mouth echoed in my mind like a hammer shattering glass. "Ma'am, this house is no longer yours. It's been sold. Sold." The word was a poison, a serpent coiling in my chest and squeezing until all the air, all the hope, was gone. My daughter-in-law, Sophia, the woman my son had loved and to whom I had opened my home and my heart after his death, had done the unthinkable. She didn't just steal a roof from over my head. She tore out the foundation of my existence, sold the walls that held 60 years of memories, laughter, tears, and love. In that moment of falling, crushed by the cruelest betrayal a mother can endure, with the smell of dust from the floor invading my nostrils, I felt the end. But what I didn't know, as the darkness swallowed me, was that the end is sometimes just the beginning of a silent war. And in that fall, in the silence of my collapse, the fragile, frightened woman everyone saw began to die, and another, forged in pain and humiliation, prepared to rise. We would like to feel your presence in this very moment. Please write in the comments which city you are watching us from and what time it is there now. By doing this, we create a network of energy and support for this story, a reminder that we are not alone in our battles. Each comment is a point of light in our healing process. Consciousness returned in painful fragments, like shards of glass slowly fitting together to form an image I didn't want to see. The first sense to awaken was touch. The roughness of the old, unsanded porch wood against my cheek, the small splinters scratching my paper-thin skin. Then, smell. A scent of dry dust mixed with the sweet, cloying aroma of the petunias I no longer had the strength to water. When I opened my eyes, the San Antonio sun blinded me for a moment, a cruel spotlight illuminating my stage of humiliation. Above me, two silhouettes were cut against the pale blue sky. The young couple. The young woman's face was a mask of superficial concern, while the young man seemed more impatient than compassionate. And then, a third figure entered my field of vision, kneeling beside me. It was Mateo, my neighbor's son, a young lawyer whose kindness had always been a small beacon in my growing loneliness. His hand on my shoulder was warm and firm, a stark contrast to the cold that had settled in my bones. "Elena, are you all right? Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice an anchor in the storm of confusion raging in my head. I tried to answer, to form words, but my throat was closed, a knot of shock and pain preventing me from speaking. The young buyer's words still echoed in my mind. Sold. The house. My house. Sold. I was a stranger who had fallen on the threshold of my own home, an old, unwanted piece of furniture, exposed for all to see my fragility, my defeat. The shame was a wave of heat rising up my neck, stronger than the pain of the fall, more overwhelming than the fear of what was to come. With Mateo's help, I managed to sit in my old rocking chair, the one where I used to rock my son to sleep, where Roberto and I watched the stars on warm summer nights. Now it felt like a defendant's stand. The young couple, maintaining a respectful but firm distance, approached again. The young man, perhaps feeling the need to justify his brutal intrusion, held out the sheaf of papers towards me. "Ma'am, I'm sorry about what happened, but it's all here. The purchase and sale agreement. It was all done legally." My eyes, blurred with unshed tears, focused on the documents. They were white, crisp, official sheets, so different from the yellowed memories that filled that house. And there it was, at the bottom of the page, unmistakable and nauseating. Sophia's signature. It was a flowery, pretentious script, each loop and curve a declaration of her arrogance. She had always been proud of her signature, practicing it like a movie star. Now, that same signature was the murder weapon, the cold, irrefutable proof of her betrayal. Mateo took the papers, his eyes scanning the clauses with a professional speed that was foreign to me. "This is absurd," he muttered, more to himself than to me. The couple glanced at each other, a subtle gesture of impatience. The young woman spoke, her voice sounding falsely sweet. "Look, we gave Sophia an excellent price, and she assured us that vacating the premises would be smooth. We don't want to cause trouble for you, really, but we have our rights too. We invested our life savings in this. Vacating the premises." They spoke as if I were a delinquent tenant, not a woman who had lived there for nearly 6 decades. Every word was a shovelful of dirt thrown over my past, burying me alive in my own home. The scene on my porch quickly became a neighborhood attraction. Mrs. Rosa, from across the street, appeared behind her lace curtains, her eyes as curious as a bird's. Mr. Henderson, who walked his beagle every morning, stopped on the sidewalk, pretending to adjust the dog's leash while craning his neck not to miss a single detail. The low sound of our voices was like a magnet, drawing the attention of a community that, until then, had offered me only cordial and distant nods. The humiliation, once an intimate and suffocating feeling, was now a public spectacle. I shrank into the chair, wishing I could disappear, merge with the wooden slats and vanish. The shame was a heavy, rough cloak. The young couple, now aware of their audience, raised their voices as if they needed to defend their position before a jury of neighbors. "We acted in good faith," the young man said, gesturing with the papers. "The documentation is registered in Bezar County. The seller is Sophia Ramirez, her daughter-in-law. It's not our fault if they had some family disagreement." Family disagreement. He reduced the destruction of my life to a trivial squabble. Mateo tried to intervene, speaking in a low, controlled tone, but the young man cut him off. "Look, buddy, I get that you want to help, but the law is on our side. We gave her a 30-day notice. That's more than the law requires." They were no longer talking to me, but about me. I was an object, a problem, the occupant, the lady, her, the center of the discussion, and at the same time, completely invisible. My voice and my story completely erased by the black ink on a fraudulent contract. Mateo, with an authority that belied his young age, finally convinced the couple to leave, promising that his office would be in touch. They left, leaving behind a heavy silence and the eviction notice on the small table beside my chair. He helped me inside, and the click of the door closing sounded like the lid of a coffin. The interior, which had always been my safe haven, now felt like enemy territory, a place I was no longer allowed to be. Every object seemed to accuse me. The picture frame on the shelf, with the photo of my son smiling next to Sophia on their wedding day, was a stab to the heart. The old sewing machine in the corner, silent for years, seemed to mock the trembling, arthritic hands that could no longer create, nor even defend themselves. I sat at the kitchen table, the linoleum cold beneath my feet, and stared at the white paper. 30 days. A deadline for the end of everything I knew. Mateo began to talk about legal options, about challenging the sale, about proving fraud. But his words were a distant hum, muffled by the sound of my own blood pulsing in my ears. My mind was stuck on a single thought, a devastating truth that was crystallizing amidst the chaos. Sophia didn't just want the money from the house. She wanted to erase me, to annihilate me, to leave me with nothing, not even a past. And as I looked at her elegant signature on the eviction notice, I knew with a terrifying certainty that the sale of the house was only the first blow she had planned. This house was not born with the silence that now haunts it. I remember when its walls were new and smelled of fresh pine and whitewash. Roberto, my late husband, raised every beam with his own hands, his thick, calloused palms turning a dusty plot of land into our sanctuary. Back then, The sound that filled these rooms was his hammer during the day, and his deep laughter at night. And then came Marco, our son, and the house learned a new kind of music, a baby's cry, the pitter-patter of little feet running down the wooden hallway, the sound of a scraped knee being comforted with a kiss and a bandage. My life was a tapestry, woven with the threads of silent sacrifice and unconditional love. My hands, now gnarled with arthritis, spent days at the sewing machine, turning scraps of fabric into clothes for my son and dresses for the neighbors, earning a few extra dollars to supplement Roberto's income. Every meal was prepared with the care of one who feeds the soul, not just the body. The garden, now a tangle of weeds and sadness, was once my pride, a carpet of roses and carnations that perfumed the entire street. I never saw any of this as a burden. It was the essence of my existence, the purpose that got me up every morning. This house was not just a structure of wood and nails. It was the physical repository of my youth, my marriage, my motherhood. Every stain on the floor, every mark on the wall, was a paragraph in our story, and I was its guardian. I believed I would grow old here, surrounded by these memories, until the day I joined Roberto. The naivety of that belief now seems like the cruelest of ironies. Sophia's arrival was like introducing a strange, vibrant color into a pastel painting. Marco brought her home one Sunday afternoon, and I remember thinking how impeccably put together she was. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her nails painted a bold red, and her green eyes, though beautiful, had a coldness that gave me a momentary shiver. But my son looked at her with an adoration that would melt the hardest of hearts, and mine, a mother's, just wanted to see him happy. So I silenced that little voice of mistrust and opened my arms and my home to her. I helped sew the delicate pearl beading on her wedding veil, my hands guiding the needle with the same devotion with which I had sewn Marco's baptismal gown. When they married and decided to live with me to save money, I rearranged my life without hesitation. I gave them the largest bedroom, the one with the best morning light, and moved into the smaller one at the back. I cooked their favorite foods, made sure Marco's shirts were always ironed, and kept the house in an order that pleased Sophia's demanding eyes. I saw it as a continuation of my care for my son. If she made him happy, then it was my duty to love and serve her too. I believed I was building a new phase for our family, founded on the same love that built these walls. Little did I know that, for Sophia, I wasn't building a family, but merely maintaining a property she already coveted. The axis of my world broke the day Marco died. A sudden fever, an aggressive infection that the doctors couldn't contain, and in less than a week, the sound of his laughter was permanently silenced within these walls. Grief should have united us, me and Sophia, two women who loved the same man. We should have been each other's support, a shared refuge in the storm of loss. At first, it seemed it would be that way. We cried in each other's arms at the funeral, a weeping that seemed to come from the same place of pain. But Sophia's mourning was brief and strangely pragmatic. While I drowned in memories, unable to look at a photograph of Marco without falling apart, she began to talk about bills, life insurance, and reorganizing finances. Her pain transformed into a calculating coldness. She took control of everything, claiming I was too fragile to handle bureaucracy. She collected my small pension book, saying she would take care of the payments so I wouldn't have to worry. The atmosphere of the house changed. The air became heavy, charged with a tension I couldn't name. Smiles became rare and forced. Small acts of cruelty began to appear. A sarcastic comment about how long I took to eat, an impatient sigh when I asked for help opening a jar. The warmth that Roberto and I had cultivated for decades was being systematically sucked out, leaving behind a cold vacuum of loneliness and fear. I was mourning my son, and without realizing it, I was also mourning my own life, which was being dismantled before my very eyes. The first time she humiliated me with words was on an autumn afternoon. I was in the kitchen, shelling peas in silence, when I heard voices on the front porch. It was Sophia and one of her friends, a woman with a loud, shrill laugh. Didn't mean to eavesdrop, But the kitchen window was open and their words drifted in on the afternoon breeze. "I don't know what to do, Brenda," Sophia said, her voice a mixture of false confidence and complaint. "It's a burden, honestly. Since Marco passed, it's just another mouth to feed, another expense. Her pension barely pays for her medication. I'm stuck in this old house, taking care of an elderly woman. My life is on hold." The word burden hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stopped moving my hands, a pea pod forgotten between my fingers. Burden. Extra mouth. I, who had dedicated every fiber of my being to building that home, was now reduced to a debit column in an imaginary ledger. Her friend replied something in a comforting tone, but I was no longer listening. The ringing in my ears was deafening. I stood there, motionless, feeling the blood drain from my face. The shame was so intense I felt naked, exposed. She wasn't just talking about money. She was invalidating my entire life of contribution, of love, of sacrifice. When Sophia came into the kitchen a few minutes later, she saw me standing there and asked with ill-disguised irritation, "What's wrong? Did you see a ghost?" I couldn't answer. I just shook my head and continued my work, but something inside me had broken irrevocably. I was no longer the matriarch of that house. I was a problem to be managed. If you love Jesus and believe this story will teach us something, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes of Healing and Wisdom Stories. Your subscription is an act of faith in your own transformation, and I ask you to join our community of souls who have gone through something similar. The second humiliation was more public, more deliberate, and therefore crueler. Sophia decided to host a small dinner party for some work colleagues, people she wanted to impress. From the start of the day, she made it clear that my presence was not welcome. "It will be better for you to rest in your room, Mom," she said, with that venomous sweetness she had perfected. "It's a lot of people, a lot of noise. You would get tired." I knew it was an excuse to hide me, to erase me from the social equation she was trying to build. I obeyed in silence, as I always did. From my room, I could hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the low music. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Hours later, thirst got the better of me, and I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, trying to be as quiet as possible. But as I passed the dining room, Sophia saw me. All eyes turned to me. An awkward silence fell over the table. Instead of introducing me or inviting me to sit down, Sophia smiled a tense smile and said in a loud, clear voice for everyone to hear, "Oh, there you are. Mom, how nice of you to appear. Would you be so kind as to bring us another pitcher of ice water from the kitchen? Ours is empty." The request was not a request. It was an order disguised as courtesy, designed to put me in my place, that of a servant. I felt the pitying and uncomfortable stares of the guests on me. My face burned. Without a word, I turned, went to the kitchen, filled the pitcher with trembling hands, and brought it to the table. I placed it next to Sophia and retreated to my room, swallowing the lump of humiliation that threatened to choke me. That night, I understood that for Sophia, I was no longer family. I was an inconvenient object that she used when it suited her. The days following the arrival of the eviction notice were a blur of despair. Under the watchful eye of Sophia, who now barely concealed her haste to see me gone, I began the unbearable task of packing my life into cardboard boxes. Every object I touched was a portal to a memory, and every memory was a new torture. Marco's little wool booty that I had kept for over 50 years, Roberto's collection of porcelain thimbles, the yellowed letters we exchanged during his military service. How do you put an entire life into boxes? It was like trying to box up the air itself. I felt defeated, a useless old woman whose only remaining function was to disappear quietly. On a gray afternoon, while emptying the back of my old wooden closet, a place where I kept sheets and forgotten relics, my fingers brushed against something cold, metallic, and rectangular. It was Roberto's small toolbox, the one he used for minor repairs, now covered in a layer of dust and rust. I hadn't seen it in years. Curiosity, an emotion I thought I had lost forever, spurred me on. With an effort that made my aching joints protest, I forced the rusted latch. The creak it made as it opened sounded like a groan from the past. Inside, on a piece of faded velvet, there were no tools, but rather a thick, yellowed manila envelope. My heart gave a painful leap. With trembling fingers, I opened it and slid out the folded document it contained. It wasn't just old papers. It was the original deed to the house, in the names of Roberto Garcia and Elena Garcia, a document that Sophia, in her hurried greed, never knew existed. And on that yellowed piece of paper, I felt the ghost of my husband's hand on mine, telling me not to give up. There, sitting on the cold, dusty floor of my closet, with the smell of mothballs and stored time all around me, Roberto's original deed rested in my trembling hands. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a talisman. The paper, yellowed and fragile at the edges, seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, a strength I thought had died along with my husband and son. Every letter of the official script, every seal from the Bexar County Clerk's office dated decades ago, was a testament to my truth, my history. The tears that had been my constant companions for months simply dried up. The knot of despair in my throat dissolved, replaced by a column of cold, unshakable steel. I raised my head and faced my reflection in the stained mirror on the closet door. The woman looking back still had sunken eyes and wrinkled skin, but there was something different in them. A spark. It was the flame of dignity I believed had been extinguished forever under the weight of Sophia's humiliation and abuse. I was not just a senile, helpless old woman waiting to be discarded. I was Elena Garcia, the woman who helped lay the bricks of this house, the mother who raised a beloved son within these walls, and the widow of an honorable man who would never allow such an injustice. The weakness evaporated, leaving behind a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in a very long time. I picked up the phone with a hand that, to my surprise, did not tremble. I dialed Mateo's number. When he answered, my voice was not the frightened whisper he was used to hearing. It was the voice of a woman who had found her weapon and was ready to fight. "Mateo," I said, with a calmness that surprised him. "I found it. I found something that changes everything." Mateo arrived in less than 20 minutes, his anxious expression turning to amazement and then to an exultant smile upon seeing the deed. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had felt so powerless, and spread the document over the worn Formica surface. The original deed, next to the fraudulent eviction notice, was like sunlight next to a shadow. He explained the legal details to me in simple language I could understand. That paper proved my continuous and uninterrupted ownership. Sophia's sale, carried out with a forged signature on a duplicate copy she must have fraudulently requested, was null and void. He talked about filing an injunction, suing her for fraud, contacting the authorities. He laid out a legal battle plan, full of motions and petitions. But as he spoke, I knew there was a step that needed to be taken before any lawyer or judge got involved. I needed to confront Sophia, not with screams or accusations, but with the truth. It was a visceral need, the only way to reclaim the power she had stolen from me within my own home. "Before we do anything, Mateo," I interrupted him gently, "I need to talk to her, here, in this house." He protested, worried about the stress, about the possibility of a fight. But he saw the determination in my eyes and understood that this was non-negotiable. It was no longer just about getting the property back. It was about restoring my soul. We spent the next hour not planning a lawsuit, but preparing my testimony, the few simple words I would say to break the chains of submission forever. Sophia arrived in the late afternoon, humming a random tune, her arms laden with shopping bags from an expensive department store. The scent of her expensive perfume invaded the house, a fragrance that always seemed to me like an attempt to mask emptiness. She stopped abruptly in the living room doorway. I was not in my room, nor was I packing boxes. I was sitting in Roberto's velvet armchair, the place that had been his throne and which I had avoided since his death. I was waiting for her, motionless, serene. On the small table beside me, like a piece of evidence in a courtroom, rested the original deed. Sophia's smile froze, her face cycling through a rapid succession of emotions. First irritation at seeing me out of my designated place, then confusion, and finally pure, icy panic as her eyes fixed on the yellowed document. "What is that?" she asked, her voice losing its musical tone and becoming harsh. I didn't answer immediately, just stared at her, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "This house," I began, my voice low but resonating with an authority that made her take a step back. "This house is not just made of bricks and wood, Sophia. It was built with the hands of your late husband, my son. Every nail was hammered with love, and every window installed with the hope of a future. You didn't sell a property. You sold his memory. You sold his laughter in this hallway, his height marks on the kitchen doorframe. But that memory, and this deed," I said, placing my hand on the paper, "you could never steal." Sophia's mask of arrogance shattered, revealing the pale, frightened face of a thief caught in the act. She tried to compose herself, stammering excuses and empty threats. That's nothing. It's just an old piece of paper. I have the legal documents. You're senile, that's the truth. I'll call the police. Say you're threatening me." She blustered, but her words had no conviction. The power had shifted in that room. I didn't move, didn't change my expression. The woman she had tormented for months was gone. Before her stood someone she didn't recognize. "No," I said with quiet finality. "You won't call anyone. You will pack your things. The money you stole cannot buy your way out of this fraud, and it cannot buy back the respect you lost today." I rose from the armchair, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. "I will fight for this house, not for revenge, Sophia, but for respect. Respect. For Roberto, for Marco, and for myself." She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear, completely disarmed by my calmness. She turned and ran to the bedroom, slamming the door. The sound echoed through the house, not as an act of defiance, but as the last spasm of a defeated power. That night, I didn't sleep in my room. I slept in Roberto's armchair, guarding the living room like a sentinel. Sophia didn't understand my gesture, but it was a warning. The next morning, what I did would leave everyone speechless. The promise of that night's vigil was fulfilled with the first rays of sun. Before Sophia even left her room, Matteo and I were already in motion, not with the fury of revenge, but with the quiet precision of a chess game. Our first stop was the small community bank at the end of the street. With the original deed and my identification documents in hand, I explained the situation to the manager, a man with a graying mustache who had known me since I was a young mother. I showed him how Sophia had been diverting my pension into an account that only she controlled. With a calmness that surprised me, I requested that all joint accounts be frozen and the funds reversed to a new account, solely in my name. The manager, seeing the irrefutable proof of my identity as the owner and the determination in my eyes, acted quickly and discreetly. From there, we went directly to the Bexar County Clerk's office. Matteo, with impressive efficiency, filed a lis pendens on my property. He explained that this was like putting a big red flag on the house's record, a legal notice to the entire world that the title was under dispute, making it impossible for the young couple or anyone else to finalize the purchase or take possession. As I signed the papers, my hand, which once trembled holding a cup of tea, was steady. I was not a victim asking for help. I was a citizen exercising her rights. In that sterile, bureaucratic environment, amidst stamps and signatures, I was silently dismantling Sophia's castle of lies, brick by brick. The consequences for Sophia did not come in the form of a dramatic confrontation, but as a series of dull, humiliating thuds. The first was her credit card being declined at the luxury coffee shop she frequented every morning. I heard her come home, huffing with anger, and call the bank, her voice shifting from arrogance to a shrill panic upon being informed that the primary account holder had revoked her access. Shortly after, the phone rang again. It was her lawyer, and from what I could hear of the muffled shouts through the door, he was furious about the lis pendens notice that had completely messed up his strategy. The final blow came in the form of a registered letter, delivered by a court officer. The young couple, now represented by their own lawyer, was suing her for fraud and misrepresentation, demanding the immediate return of every penny they had paid. I watched her disintegration from a distance, not with pleasure, but with a sad sense of inevitability. I saw the woman who wore designer clothes to impress others now dressed in the previous day's rumpled pajamas, her face pale and without makeup, her eyes red from crying and rage. The shopping bags she had brought home the day before were forgotten in a corner, useless monuments to her greed. While she drowned in the consequences of her choices, I spent my days in a calm, healing activity, unpacking my boxes, not as a fugitive, but as a queen, returning to her castle, carefully deciding where each memory should be placed. The legal battle, which I had feared would drag on for years, ended with surprising speed. Faced with the original deed and the bank fraud investigation, Sophia's lawyer advised her to accept a settlement to avoid criminal charges. She disappeared from my life as suddenly as she had invaded it. A moving truck came one morning and took her things. She didn't say goodbye, didn't dare to look me in the eye. With the, money from the fraudulent sale returned to the young couple, a painful chapter finally closed. But the real healing came from where I least expected it. A few days after Sophia's departure, the young couple knocked on my door. They didn't come with lawyers or papers, but with a bouquet of wildflowers and eyes full of sincere regret. They apologized profusely for the pain they had unknowingly caused me. And in that moment, looking at their young, frightened faces, I didn't see enemies, but other, victims of the same greed. I invited them in, and the conversation that followed was the first brick in rebuilding my faith in human kindness. The news of my silent fight spread through the neighborhood. Mrs. Rosa brought me a pot of her famous chicken soup. Mr. Henderson spent a whole Saturday fixing my broken fence gate. The community that once saw me with pity now looked at me with a new respect. The house, which had been a place of isolation, became a gathering spot, a symbol that decency still existed in our little corner of the world. The months that followed were a time of rebirth. The young couple, whom I began to call Anna and Carlos, became a constant and warm presence in my life. On Sundays, they would come to help me in the garden. With their hands, strong and young, mixed with mine, old and wrinkled, we pulled out the weeds of neglect and planted new seeds of hope. The roses began to bloom again, more vibrant than ever. The neighbors, inspired by our little task force, organized a community effort to paint the house, restoring the walls to the peach color Roberto had chosen so many years ago. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air again. Anna taught me how to use a tablet to see pictures of faraway places, and I taught her the secrets to a good pie crust. I would look at my house, now full of life, and understand the true nature of my victory. It wasn't about winning a legal dispute or seeing Sophia punished. It was about transforming the ashes of betrayal into a home again. It was about discovering that family is not always made of blood ties, but of threads of kindness and mutual respect that we weave with those who cross our paths. I look at my hands, at the prominent veins and the time-spotted skin, and I no longer see fragility. I see the strength that held me up. Today, I don't have the luxury that Sophia so coveted, but I have respect, and that, I've learned, no one can ever take from me again.